Welcome back to PMP. We heard stories from MPs earlier in the show about how they feel about passing new legislation on assisted dying. The controversial Bill C-14 has been pushed through the House in order to meet the June 6 deadline that was imposed by the Supreme Court, and has some arguing it goes too far, while others say it's just not enough. Meanwhile, the Senate has been doing a pre-study of the bill in order to move it quickly through the Red Chamber when the time comes. But now, with only 2 sitting weeks left before that looming deadline, the government says it's prepared to let the debate run all night if necessary. So have MPs actually had enough time to dig into this? And will the bill meet the Supreme Court's requirements or end up facing a new constitutional challenge? Joining me from the foyer of the House of Commons, Sean Casey, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Justice Minister. Michael Cooper is the Deputy Conservative Justice Critic. And Alistair MacGregor, first time on the show, is the NDP's Critic for Seniors. So nice to see you all. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Sean Casey, let's start with you. How far is the government willing to go to push this through to meet the deadline, even though there are people who, MPs, who feel they haven't had enough time to speak about it? There are some people that believe the bill is flawed. Is it more important to get it passed, or is it more important to get it right?
Well, I believe that we can do both, and we're trying to certainly meet the June 6th deadline. I believe that it's responsible for us to take all measures possible to meet that June 6th deadline so that we don't end up with a legal vacuum. And as you heard the House Leader say earlier, we're prepared to sit right through the night so that anybody that wants to speak to it can. Your suggestion that some people feel that they haven't yet had a chance to speak to it, on second reading, as you would know, we were sitting until midnight, and we got to the point where the NDP had stopped putting up speakers and the Conservatives were putting people up for a second and third time. So everyone who wanted to speak to it on second reading, if they were in the House or during the designated hours, they had ample opportunity to speak, and we'd like to be able to afford that as well if we can get cooperation of the other parties to be able to sit through the House, but we sit through the night. But we do think that it's very important that the deadline that has been imposed by the Supreme Court be respected.
Do you really, I'll go to everybody else in a second, but do you really think it would create a legal vacuum? Because there are parameters in the Supreme Court decision itself. They may not be the parameters the government likes, but there are parameters in there and criteria that would have to be met.
That's a fair point, Rosie. What will happen is that some of the safeguards in the bill will no longer, will not become law. So, for example, it will not be necessary to have 2 doctors. It will not be necessary to have 2 witnesses. There will be no 10-day reflection period. So all of these safeguards that have been built in to protect the vulnerable will not exist, and we'll be left in a situation where there could very well be a patchwork depending on how the provinces elect to fulfill their jurisdiction in terms of health care.
Okay, fair enough. So, Michael Cooper, if that happens, and you know, if you can't get this done, or if the Senate holds it up, which is a real possibility, there are Conservative senators in the Red Chamber who have serious concerns about some aspects of this bill. Are you comfortable with the fact that the Supreme Court ruling would be what rules the country for now?
Well, I think that it is important that we meet the June 6th deadline. There would be a vacuum. What we would have is a patchwork of inconsistencies. Yes, perhaps the various colleges might step up and impose standards, but the standards that have come out of the colleges are inconsistent from province to province. What we need is certainty, and the only way to do that is to pass a bill on June 6th.
Okay, and for you, Alistair, what are your concerns about how quickly this is being done, and do you think that anything is being sacrificed in the name of this deadline?
Well, I think this is probably the most important piece of legislation that has come across Parliament in over a decade now, and I truly believe that on an issue like this, every constituent across the country wants to have their member of Parliament have a say. Now, with respect to opening up the debate to the wee hours of the morning, members of Parliament, frankly speaking, are not at their best at 3 a.m. or even 12 midnight for that reason. And I think constituents who are watching this debate want to have the opportunity to watch it live and watch their MP at their best. So I'm concerned about putting the debate all night long, because I want us to truly be at our best and speak on our constituents' behalf.
But would you be comfortable then with no legislation passing and then the Supreme Court being the law of the land in that case?
I have to admit I am a little concerned about the legal vacuum, but there are other measures the government could be taking. Like, for example, today we spent much of the day debating Bill C-10. We could have made a lot of room today to debate C-14. We could have opened up the rest of the week to C-14. So the government had a choice. It made a choice to go with C-10, and that's what we're going to be living with for the rest of the week.
Okay, sorry, is that Sean Casey? Go ahead.
No, it's...
go ahead, Michael Cooper.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I agree with Alistair. I don't agree that this whole issue that the government has said, yeah, we need to meet the deadline, but unfortunately there was an opportunity to have debate at second reading, and they shut off debate about a day in advance of what was necessary. We proposed that members have an opportunity to speak to the bill up until midnight. That is a perfectly reasonable proposal, but to consume today on C-10 and say that MPs who want to speak on C-14 have to show up at 3 o'clock in the morning is, I think it's just very unbecoming of the government.
Well, there's a fair amount of procedural hijinks on both sides, I would argue. But let me just turn back to do one more round about the substance of the issue, which I think is what matters more to Canadians than the hijinks. And that it comes from Rob Oliphant, who is the co-chair of this special committee. And I talked to him last week, as you know, and he no longer believes that he can vote for this legislation. And one of the reasons that he believes that fundamentally is that he doesn't think that this is going to meet a charter challenge, and he thinks it's going to end up back in court. So let me play that clip and get you all to react.
I think there will be a very immediate challenge to this law. The judges who ruled 9-0, giving those rights to people who had a grievous and irremediable disease, who have intolerable suffering, don't need to take treatment they don't want. I think even if they don't have foreseeable death in the foreseeable future, I think they're going to be allowed the right to die, and I think the law will have to come back to Parliament, and we could be looking at it again.
Okay, so Sean Casey, what's the point in passing a law that lots of people, including the co-chair of the committee, believe is going to end up back in court?
Well, I guess what I would say to you is that if you asked two constitutional lawyers a question, you may well get three opinions. And there's all kinds of constitutional lawyers and wannabe constitutional lawyers weighing in on this. There are indeed opinions that were heard both by the Special Joint Committee and by the Justice Committee that indicated that the bill was Charter compliant and Carter compliant. Look, in the Carter case, what the Supreme Court of Canada said is that an absolute prohibition on physician-assisted dying is unconstitutional. And what it also said was that it would show great deference to Parliament, which is best placed to put in robust safeguards. So those things are part of the pronouncement in Carter. That's exactly what we've done. Professor Diane Poitier, Professor Hamish Stewart have both indicated in their constitutional analysis that the bill is sound. We have the Canadian Medical Association, the Canadian Nurses Association, the people who would be subject to a criminal charge that have come out in support of this bill. We are satisfied that it will absolutely withstand a constitutional challenge.
Okay, I'm gonna hold that clip then. Michael Cooper and Alistair MacGregor, quickly your thoughts on whether it will.
Yeah. Well, I believe the legislation satisfies the parameters of Carter. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be voting for the bill. I'm weighing my options at this point, but I do believe it satisfies the parameters of Carter. And look, it's going to be challenged. It's going to be challenged no matter what. Sure. That's what living in Canada with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is.
Alistair MacGregor, your thoughts?
Yeah, and with respect to Mr. Casey, I completely disagree with him. When the Supreme Court came across with that 9-0 ruling, they were ruling on a specific case of Kay Carter, and she had a condition of spinal stenosis, which was not near death, and so they were looking at her particular case. I don't think the bill as it stands now would meet a charter challenge, and my vote too is sitting on the fence because of that.
Okay, interesting. A good conversation, everybody. Sean Casey, Michael Cooper, Alistair MacGregor. For some reason, Sean Casey, everybody on Twitter knows it's your birthday. So happy birthday, and I'm sure these guys will buy you a piece of cake. Thank you all, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Coming up on Power and Politics, a third candidate